I'm Angela Willis, and in today's episode of Women That Kill, we look at Toni Jo Henry, who was convicted of murder. She was only 26 years old when she was put to death by the electric chair in Louisiana in 1942. This case helps us better understand prostitution during the Great Depression, which a lot of women had to do to survive. Toni Jo Henry was born Annie Beatrice McQuiston in Shreveport, Louisiana. She was the third of 5 children. Her mother contracted tuberculosis, a serious infectious disease that mainly affects the lungs. Toni was sent to live with her grandmother while her mother was recovering. Sadly, Toni's mother died of tuberculosis when Toni was 6 years old. After her mother's death, Toni lived with her father and new stepmother. At the start of the Great Depression, Toni became a teenager. It was very difficult for her to find work to help support her family. Louisiana was deeply affected by the Great Depression. The Great Depression drove millions into poverty. As much as 50 to 60% of the total American population lived in poverty. Social Security, unemployment, and other welfare programs did not exist. But at 13, Toni got a part-time job in a macaroni factory, but she was quickly fired when the manager found out that tuberculosis was in her family. When she came home and told her father about what happened, he beat her for losing her job. As a result, Toni ran away from home and became homeless. On the streets, she began to hustle and prostitute to survive. She changed her name to Toni Jo Hood. She worked in a brothel in Shreveport red light district to make more money. Despite the financial struggles, prostitution remained a productive profession. In the 1930s, women who had opted for prostitution had 2 ways of working. They could work independently on their own, or they can get into a ringer house. To work as a ringer, women had to be tested for disease and get a health certificate. Ringer houses were usually part of a chain of houses, and the women would be registered at the main house. While working in Shreveport, Toni became addicted to drugs and alcohol. She eventually decided to move to Texas to improve her life. However, in Texas is when things really got bad for Toni. In 1939, Toni met Claude Henry, whose nickname was Cowboy, in Austin, Texas. Cowboy was a boxer who was out on bail awaiting a second trial over the murder of Arthur Sinclair. In a short time, the pair fell in love and married on November 25, 1939. They spent their honeymoon in California. Upon returning to Texas, Claude's second trial began. During the trial, Claude claimed self-defense and believed he would be acquitted of all charges. Instead, he was found guilty, and in January 1940, he was sentenced to 50 years in the Texas State Penitentiary at Huntsville. At the sentencing hearing, Toni vowed to get Claude out of jail and thus embarked on a series of the most bizarre criminal acts which had no hope. Despite being warned by several criminal friends that the idea was hopeless, she moved forward with her plan and looked for someone to assist her. Eventually, she met Harold Burks, who was an ex-convict and AWOL from the U.S. military. Burks had served time in Huntsville prison and claimed he could get Cowboy out. They came up with a plan. First, they would steal a car because they didn't have a car. Second, Burke wanted to rob a bank that he knew in a small town in Arkansas, over 300 miles away. Third, they would use the money from the bank robbery to get Cowboy out of jail. There really wasn't a plan in place on how they were going to get Cowboy out of jail. They just knew that having a lot of money would help. Huntsville Prison was a large, maximum security and well-run jail at the time. It would be almost impossible for them to break him out, but nevertheless they moved forward with their plan. Armed with stolen pistols and posing as newlyweds, Burke and Toni hitchhiked. Eventually they arrived in Orange, Texas and began looking for a car to steal. At that exact moment, Joseph P. Calloway was driving a brand new Ford VA coupe for a friend to Louisiana, where he would drop the car off. Calloway saw Burke and Toni hitchhiking and decided to offer them a ride. They drove onwards towards Louisiana. At one point during the trip, Toni pulled out a revolver and ordered Calloway to turn off the main road onto an isolated road near Lake Charles, Louisiana. Then they all got out of the car, and Toni ordered Calloway to take off all of his clothes. Toni wanted the clothes for Cowboy to change into when they broke him out of jail. They also took the $15 Calloway had. She ordered Calloway into the trunk. Burke and Toni drove until they found a remote spot. Toni ordered Calloway out of the trunk, and then she walked him across the field to some haystacks. She told him to get on his knees and say his prayers. Then she calmly shot him in the back of the head. Toni and Burke drove through the night to Camden, Arkansas. They booked into a cheap hotel. While Toni slept, Burke, who had been completely freaked out by Toni's cold-blooded killing, escaped in the car. Finding herself abandoned, Toni gave up on the plan and used the last of the stolen money for a bus ticket back to Shreveport, Louisiana. Toni stayed with her aunt, but the aunt became suspicious. She would ask Toni questions, but her niece always avoided answering. The aunt realized that Toni was in trouble and went to the local police for help. Sergeant Dave Walker went to speak with Toni at the request of her aunt. Without any prompting, Toni gave a full confession about Calloway's murder. She even gave the officer the gun. Walker, however, didn't believe her. No murder had been reported. There was no body, no car reported stolen. Nevertheless, he arrested her. Toni was transported to the Lake Charles police, who took her out in a vehicle to locate the body of the man she killed. To the officer's surprise, Toni guided them directly to Calloway's body. The body was precisely like Toni had left it. If she had not led them to the body, it might have been months or years before anyone found it. The bullet that killed him was recovered at the autopsy and matched the bullets found in Toni's gun. Eventually, police tracked down the stolen Ford coupe in Arkansas, where it had been abandoned. The car still contained Calloway's clothing. Toni was formally charged with the murder. Police asked her about her accomplice, but she refused to disclose who helped her. Eventually, she told the police, and Burke was arrested and charged with murder. During his interview with the police, Burke claimed he was broke when he met Toni and just went along with her ridiculous plan because it was an easy way to get a free ride back to Arkansas. He never planned to kill anyone, rob a bank, or help get Calloway out of jail. He just wanted a ride. Despite his statement, he was arrested and charged with murder. Toni's trial began in Lake Charles on March 27, 1940. The trial attracted huge press coverage. The media described her as a sultry tigress. At trial, Toni's defense tried to blame Burke for the killing, but the jury didn't believe it. 2 days after the trial began, Toni was found guilty of murder, which at the time had a mandatory sentence of death. Burke was also convicted at his trial a year later and sentenced to death. For the next 2 years, Toni won 2 appeals and was granted 2 trials. Each time she was found guilty and was given the death sentence. In 1941, Louisiana had changed its execution method from hanging to electrocution. Toni's lawyers challenged the constitutionality of the change based on the 8th Amendment, which prohibited cruel and unusual punishment. Still, the Supreme Court found that this new method was in line with the Constitution. Toni's last and desperate attempt was to get clemency from the governor. However, the state governor, Sam Jones, told the press that he would not give Toni Jo Henry a reprieve. During Toni's appeals, Calloway was transferred to a Texas prison farm to help with the labor shortage caused by World War II. On November 23, 1942, Calloway escaped the prison farm to rescue Toni. He was quickly recaptured and sent back to Huntsville prison. The day before her execution, the prison allowed Toni to talk to Calloway over the phone. She told him to serve his time, go straight, and try to make something of his life. On the day of execution, Toni was cheerful. On Saturday, November 28, 1942, Toni was executed at 12:05 p.m. She wore a black dress and black pumps. She cried when her head was shaved and was allowed to wear a scarf to hide her baldness. After the guard read the death warrant, he asked her if she had any final statements. She replied, "I think not," and was then led to the execution chamber. She walked calmly and smiled at the several press reporters who were present. The press took photos of her before she walked into the execution room. She was allowed to pray for a few moments. Then 2,000 volts hit her, and at 12:12 p.m. she was certified dead. Before her death, Toni took sole responsibility to try to save Burke, but it did not work. 1 year later, Burke was executed in the same electric chair as Toni. The state of Texas released Calloway from prison in 1944. He was shot and killed on July 15, 1945 in a bar fight. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you want to learn more about women that kill, check out some of my other videos. Have a great day.